Is it recording?
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. Ooh, so we are talking about more into identity, and so we're doing sex and gender. So this is definitely something where I'll share just for myself that I am feeling slightly anxious and nervous. So just being upfront and real about that, because I know this is like you've put a lot of you've gone through your own journey and thinking, and like I'm definitely coming from very different place and experience. So
Is this not a conversation that we would have?
this is also a conversation. So this is great. So this is going to be it's going to be fine. Just putting it out there. So I guess as I just the same community agreements that we had from before, and recognizing, and definitely like I'm very much we're you know we both have our own work that we've done, and we're in our own different places in these conversations, and so constantly thinking about further input and further growth from other humans, as well as you know engaging in this conversation as ongoing.
Absolutely.
So with that, I was doing a little bit of thinking about this of like sort of how where we might start. And I think like one of the things that I was realizing is that a lot of times at Anytown, because we have the gender workshop at Anytown, and I think a lot of times you are brought in, whether you are officially on the workshop or not. I feel like a lot of times you are brought in and like are co-facilitating the workshop at different points of the workshop, even if it's at the beginning, to some degree. I know you're co-directing a lot, so but it would be like a special guest.
Okay, I think like all our workshop teams are fantastic and don't need me or a co-director or anyone to come in and help facilitate the workshops. So that's why like I'm saying
yeah, no. I think it's not so much that, but I think you end up being part of it in some way.
In terms of, I think, okay, to clarify. I think that the ways that I end up being part of it is in terms of representation.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? And so we have a lot of other humans who are on the spectrum as far as their gender is concerned, who have all of the knowledge and, they've been on their journey. They have all of both the academic knowledge and the lived experience to do the gender workshop. And then simply because my identities intersect so much, and I think my understanding and the manner in which I conduct myself where my gender is concerned is a little bit different in the way others understand gender. So there's the American understanding of gender, and there's the international understanding of gender. There's the international understanding of gender, and there's the third world understanding of gender. There's the third world understanding of gender, and then there's the colonial understanding of gender. The colonial understanding of gender and the colonized understanding of gender, right? Like, so all of those things I come into play a little bit, right? And so because of that, I think like, just because of the perspective that I offer, I don't co-facilitate any of the workshops that I'm not part of, but I'm invited into the workshop to offer a different perspective. That's absolutely, just want to.
I like the clarification, yes. And I think that's definitely.
Counselors who are fantastic facilitators. They don't need anyone to come, so just saying.
But I think I just brought in that context of, I think because you are invited into that space to offer a lot of those perspectives, I was reflecting on sort of my own experience of one of the things I think that ends up happening is kind of the, and also just because we're also as counselors and facilitators, we're interacting more with delegates and like supporting their experience. So one of the questions I think that comes up during the first, during the beginning is kind of, I might not remember the exact way that we phrased the question, but basically like, what is your earliest memory or experience with gender? And I think that that's something that I've never actually I don't remember if I've actually had a conversation with you specifically about your earliest experience with gender. And I feel like I kind of want to start there just to understand sort of what were some of your earliest experiences
of gender.
With gender, yeah.
I think like my most profound experience, and cheap plug, but I did a TEDx in 2015, and I asked this question in 2015, or I addressed this question in 2015 in that TEDx talk, and like I asked the audience to also explore their first memory of performing gender per se, right? Um, and so a lot of humans come up with different things. Like the first time they realize that this is the restroom they should be using, and they should be using, and this is the restroom they should not be using, right? And like things like that, you know. But reading the signs on the restrooms, grooming, so on and so forth. Yeah, those are like, they seem very simple, but they read very deep narratives into how we are told to perform gender. I think my most profound and conscious performance of gender was when uh, so my dad used to receive a yearly bonus every year, and so he'd split that with like between the three of us, my mom, himself, and myself, right? And we'd buy like clothes and, you know, just things that we needed throughout the year. So that would be like our major shopping spree, right? And for the longest time, my mom would dress me, you know. So we had a lot of lace going on, a lot of frills, frocks, dresses, skirts, like little heel thingy shoes. Don't imagine it. It's not.
No, try not to.
Yeah, do your best, right? It's not this, that's for sure, right? And so I was about 14 years old. I was in the ninth grade, so I was roughly about 14 years old, right? And so previous years, you know, there'd be a compromise, like, okay, we'll buy one pair of jeans, one pair of shorts, like that. And my dad was like, strangely enough, my dad was supportive of that because like he also liked taking me shopping because my dad likes shopping too, right? Chip off the old block. um, for those of you who don't know, I have a not good relationship with my father, but we look exactly like each other. We're twins, and a lot of times I get compared to my father a lot. Oh my God, you do this just like a babe, you know, and it's not my favorite compliment to receive, just saying, right? So that's where that comes from. Anywho, so my mom and I get into this big fight when I'm in the ninth grade where I'm like, I don't want to buy any dresses, any skirt. I don't want any of that. All I want pants, I want jeans, yada, yada, right? And so my mom gives me the money and she's like, do whatever you want. Yes. So I call my cousin who's about 14 years older than me. He's a fantastic dresser. He's got like great fashion sense. He and I go shopping and oh my God, Masa, that was like, I still remember it so vividly. It was like a dream come true. I bought jeans. I bought khakis. I bought different kinds of pants. I bought like jerseys, you know, and I bought so many nice like Ralph Lauren button downs, right? This is all from like the outlet store, so it was very affordable. Ralph Lauren button downs, all of that. Of course, I'm buying all of this in like a solid 2 sizes bigger than I actually am because, you know, like I'm exploring my gender. I'm not comfortable with my body at that point, so on and so forth. That was one of the happiest times of my life. Like I bought so much, and every single thing that I bought, I chose. And it just felt like such an empowering experience. But like profoundly, I think that is my biggest uh, memory. That is like my most profound memory of first performing gender, as like I chose to perform it. You know, outside of that, of course, there are like many memories going back all the way to, I think, mostly clothing, going back mostly all the way to times when I was very, very young and just not comfortable in wearing dresses. And, you know, I'm Indian, right? So we dress up a lot for Indian weddings and stuff like that. So it was always like ghagra and, you know, like shalwar kameez, like traditional dress. Yeah. And then like a lot of jewelry and stuff like that. And not gonna lie, when I look back at those photographs, I don't feel like I look bad. I just don't know who that is. You know, like it's more performative than I've ever been before. You know, and I perform gender, but I'm a poet. So for me, there is a pride in how I perform my gender. That's not, there's a cognitive dissonance between this performance and that performance. That is not, that is who I was. It is no longer who I am at all. Yeah. So yeah, so that's my first conscious performance of my gender, how I see my gender.
This is making me think of like, I think there's like a few things in what you said that it's making me think about. One, sort of like the examples you gave of kind of like the things that we don't necessarily, like a lot of people might not think about, but like it is sort of like the shoulds right? Like you should use this restroom, or you should do this, or you should dress this way. Um, and then at the same time, like what you mentioned of like, this is the first time of consciously like having agency in performing gender. And so I'm curious about that process of like, and I think this is something that I've been reflecting on for myself too, is like, what is the process for different people in terms of going from gender as a place of expectation and restriction to a place of agency and choice. Because I feel like, I don't know, like that's something that it's in what you're saying, like you're giving an example of like the first time that there was choice, the first time that you got to choose. And I think one of the things that I wonder about is like, what is that journey from to be able to actively choose?
You're asking?
I'm asking. Yeah, I guess I'm asking.
We're wondering. Yeah. I think for everyone it's different. I really think the only that should come into play when we're talking about anything identity related, specifically gender. Let's talk about gender right now. I don't want to say anything identity related because that's gonna muddy up some waters, right? But let's talk about gender, right? When it comes to gender, I think the only that should come into play is that humans should always have the choice, right? That spectrum is so massive, like it's massive, it's circular, it's continuous, it's fluid, it's up and down, it's up and downer, it's upper and down, like it's everywhere. It's everywhere around us, and there's no containing it, right? So why try? Everyone should be able to explore as and how they see fit within different phases of their lives. We all change so much in the course of our lives, right? Like, I'm going to ask you, are you the same person that you were when you first joined Community Temple?
Oh, absolutely not.
Even if you think about like the logistical things, right? Like just the surface level logistical things, right? You have a different car now, you have a different house now, your hair's a different length, like there's just even those basic things, right? Same thing with me. When I first joined Community Tampa Bay, I had 3 roommates. Now I live by myself, right? I definitely have a different car now, right? Like I've gone through like 3 cars now. Yeah. So things like that, right? My hair has actually changed since I joined Community Tampa Bay, right? My dressing sense has changed since I joined Community Tampa Bay, right? Like things like that. 4 years. That's what we're talking about. 4 years. Look at the level of change that's happened in life. How can a person not change in something that is so important and so essential, while believing that gender is a social construct, so essential to who they are as a human being and the beautiful complexity that we are as human beings? How can that not, how can we not be allowed to explore that? And if someone stays exactly where they are from the beginning to the end, more power to them. If somebody changes completely from where they were 10 days ago to now, more power to them. It should all be valid, and it should all be acceptable, and none of it should be restricted. Like this box is just, I don't know what it is with us in boxes. Boxes should be for moving, nothing else. So like that, the process that you're talking about, I don't know, so that's a loaded question, man. It's definitely, everyone has their own experience, right? First and foremost. Maybe some commonalities, some similarities here and there in understanding the struggle or understanding the privileges of being able to perform your gender authentically as you have chosen, or not being able to perform your gender authentically as you've chosen. That process is a very individual process. And I think I can safely say to an extent that given the current world that we live in, it is harder than it is easy. You know, even understanding that that choice is agency takes time. Right? I think getting away from the idea of well, first of all, you have to know that you have a choice. For so many of us, do we even know that we have a choice? Did we even know that we had a choice, that we could do things differently?
When was that for you in terms of kind of the first time you're like, oh, I have a choice? Or even maybe not in terms of acting on the choice, but like, was there a point? How early was that, or was that a process in kind of coming to that realization of like, this doesn't actually resonate with, you know, this performance does not fit with me.
This performance does not fit with me.
And
right, all the way, all my life, not anymore, all the way, like, yes, now do, like, I know that performance doesn't fit with me, I just don't go there anymore, right? Yeah. But like the grappling with that performance all the way until I was, I want to say maybe 26, 28. The last time I performed feminine was, can I go there?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Yeah, the last time I performed feminine was in 2007, after my grandmother passed away. It was 2006 or 2000. My grandmother passed away in 2006. I left for the States in 2007. So it was a month after she passed away to do her last rites rituals. So we have our last rites rituals don't end when we cremate the body. We have multiple last rites rituals that we go through, right? So a month later, I went to Ivarmaram, which is where she was cremated and where her ashes were sent down the river. And there's a last rites ceremony for that, right? And all the granddaughters were required to be there, as well as the daughters. We're a matriarchy, so all the granddaughters and the daughters were required to be there. So I was there for that, and that was the last time I've ever performed the feminine. You know, and I did it for my grandmother. I was very masculine performing by that time too, but I was willing to negotiate my gender performance because for my grandmother. Now, for future iterations of my family, my aunt, my mother, so on and so forth, I will not do that. I'm no longer in that space where I can negotiate my gender identity. You know what I'm saying? So like, if we're talking about process, it has been a long negotiation process, you know, and the realization that I had choice, or the realization that I had agency in performing my gender, just had to happen every day. The more I actually acted on my agency, the more I realized I had it. As opposed to, hey, I'm allowed to make this choice. You know, it was more about fighting the power, right? It was more about fighting the notion of the other people's expectations that I can't, fighting it, getting the reaction from it, and then knowing that I could. Yeah? Yeah. So not like a singular moment, like multiple moments. That even now it happens. Right? So the hardest decision that I ever made with gender is like very difficult for me. It's constantly a struggle. You know, also being like a diaspora human who's Indian understanding of gender, American understanding of gender, how I see myself in gender, how others see me in gender. Like all of those different pieces that come together, right? Can be wildly supportive and wildly erasing. You know? So American understandings of gender are very difficult for me because they are so restrictive. Even American understandings of spectrum of gender is so restrictive because it still wants to tell you what to do. You know, there is a dominance of American language on gender. That again, what does that do when there is that language? It expects you to fit in it, right? And we We teach in certain ways that expect you to fit within it. We speak in certain ways that expect you to fit in it. Majority communities perform gender, majority communities, even within the queer community, perform gender in certain ways that make you feel like an outsider, that remind you that you are an outsider. You know, so I identify as a gender non-conforming woman, right? My masculinity is very strong, very powerful, and very intimidating. I'm well aware of that, right? But my womanhood is also very strong and very powerful and very intimidating. But the fact that I identify as a woman gets me so much backlash from the LGBTQ plus community. Yeah. Almost, it gets me so much backlash. It gets me a lot of backlash. But it's an active choice that I have made. You know? And if I choose differently someday, again, that will be my choice. Right? But I'm saying, like, it's such a, it is such a process, right? That word that you used is so important. It is such a process where, but agency is never absolute. You know, it has to be recreated over and over again. What is agency to you might not be agency to me. You know, and what is felt agentic to me 5 years ago might not feel agentic to me anymore. Right? So when I was figuring out my gender, being called a woman was not agentic to me. When I was figuring out my gender, like, that's not a lifelong process. When I was much younger, 15 years ago, being called a woman was not agentic to me at all. Now I take pride in being a woman, but I don't like being called ma'am. I hate it. I don't like being called a lady. You call me sir, you know, you use he, him pronouns for me. I won't be that offended, but at the same time, I'm like, it doesn't fit, you know? Somehow for me, she, her pronouns, I love. It works for me. But my pronouns for me personally, again, right, there's this idea of your pronouns represent this. Maybe. What's the absolute in that, right? Maybe. You may be, not for me. My pronouns represent my womanhood. They don't represent my gender expression. My gender expression is just as important to me as my gender identity. My biological sex, I really don't care about.
I think, like, that helps me understand a little bit more when you're saying that even in the language and the ways that we think that there is still this restriction and boxing in that exact, like, that's a really good example of, like, the idea that, like, okay, masculine, like, performing masculine gender, right? Performing masculinity, it's like, therefore, you know, she, her pronouns don't fit. Like, there is, yeah, that's definitely something that, and I guess to some degree, it's like, knowing you, it's kind of like, oh, it's normalized for, you know, it's like, it's kind of like, oh, like, of course, like, this is Sam. And at the same time, it's like, what are the expectations that that I've created for myself if I meet somebody else who is not you, and who also has a different intersection of different ways of performing and exploring, you know, gender.
Right.
What is my reaction in those situations and for those folks, because of the fact that I might still have certain ideas or expectations that are based around what like this particular cultural norm is.
Right.
Can't hear you.
A bit louder, it's hard to hear you. What's the last thing you said?
Just because of the specific, like, cultural norms that we're in, and, like, again, like, my upbringing, the people that I'm around, and what's normal or what's expected in the larger community that, you know, that we are part of, like, how is that going to impact when, I think one of the terms that you've used before is sort of emerging identities.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that, like, in a sense, it's they're emerging for folks to me, I feel like that's centering folks who are just not aware of those identities, in the sense of, like, it's emerging for me because, like, I don't I haven't seen it before kind of a thing.
Maybe. For me, that's not, I don't use emerging identities. I don't center majority communities when, I do my best to not center majority communities when I use language, right? And so for me, emerging identities does not reference that it is emerging for you, which I can totally see that perspective, right? Like how it could seem like, well, they're not actually emerging identities. They're emerging for you because you're not used to them, right? When I use the terms emerging identities, for me, it is in the context of these identities have always existed, but they have not had the opportunity to be. They have not had the opportunity to be visible. They have not had the opportunity to actually emerge. Right? It's like coming out. You know, like this, in the same way straight humans don't have to come out. Right? Gay humans, LGBTQ plus humans, queer humans across the platform, across the spectrum of sexuality and sexual identity, you're always having to reveal yourself. You know, because you are always kept invisible. Otherwise, the normative is for us to be invisible. Therefore, the requirement for us to emerge, which kind of correlates with what you're saying. You know, yeah, that's true.
But that clarifies it. None of that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So you're right in some ways. Like it is. Sorry, it is. It's a lighter that I use. It was just yeah. That makes sense though. Like it can be both ways. You know, like we are emerging, but we have to emerge because majority communities have kept us invisible for so long. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I didn't think about it like that. Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah, gender is such a, do you know how far we are on time?
Shoot. Good question. We should probably be cognizant of time, and so I think definitely we've gone for probably a good 30 minutes.
You think?
Yeah.
So maybe another 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to make sure we're respecting everyone's time.
I apologize. That should have been on the
no, that's fine. I didn't think of it either. Yeah, so I think, and I definitely want to turn this over to you and have some questions for you as well, right? But I think there was a point I was going to make. Oh yeah, even with the idea of cisgender, right? If you look at the textbook, typical definition of what a cisgender human is, a cisgender human is someone whose biological sex aligns with their gender identity. I don't identify as a cisgender woman. You know, like there are a lot of other humans who look like me, right? Who identify as cisgender, yeah? They identify as cisgender and their gender expression or gender performance is masculine. You know what I'm saying? Totally legit, right? By textbook definition, totally legit. If that's how they identify, then who is anyone to invalidate? At the same time, I am not a cisgender woman. I will not identify like that. I'm not seen as a cisgender woman. My journey has not been that of a cisgender woman. My experience is my lived experience in terms of how others experience me is not that of a cisgender woman. Right? At the same time, I'm also not trans. At the same time, that's a binary. I'm not willing to be on either side of it. You know? So it's complicated, but it's also really simple. Right? All that matters is who you are and who you know yourself to be. You know?
I like what you said of it's complicated and at the same time it's really simple. It's when we don't examine the boxes and expectations that we bring to the table, or we don't recognize that, then it becomes something where it becomes super complicated because it's like it doesn't fit into this thing, and because it doesn't fit into what preconceptions I'm bringing to the table, then it becomes complicated as a result of that.
Okay, so we're going to go over on this conversation. It's going to happen. And I'm approving that. I'm saying it's okay. Because this is, because it's gender and we haven't even touched on sex. Okay, just to be clear.
We could actually do, we could split it. We could do
one and the other. We could do that. I don't know how much I have to say about biological sex. It's so, it feels so, it's relevant. It feels so irrelevant at the same time. Also, like thinking about this journey, you know, to womanhood, identifying as a woman. Like I made a choice myself. I had to make an active choice to identify as a woman. And I don't know if I had grown up anywhere else, whether I would have felt that, whether I would have done that. Or at a different time, whether I would have done that. And I'm fine with that. That's my peace has been made with it. But I also have been doing gender for the last 18 years, 19 years, if you, I don't know. Yeah, something like that. You know, like I've been figuring out my gender for the last 18, 19 years. You know, so I've explored all the spaces and then come back to womanhood. It's not part of my raised identity. It's part of my conscious identity. You know, it's not part of.
I'm trying not to curse right now. I'm like having moments.
I can see it, bubbles. Yeah. It's not part of. It is not part of the expectations of social constructs that makes me a woman. You know, it is part of my creation of my own social constructs that have made me a woman. You know, so I always say I was raised as a girl, but I chose to be a woman. That, you see what I mean? Right? And I just think that culturally, colonially, where we are with gender right now sometimes tends to negate the journey of how we got here. Each individual, of how each individual got there. You know, there's so quick to judge, so quick to assume. Why does she identify like that? Why would she identify like that? Oh, that's why she identifies like that. No questions. So much simpler, no, when we ask questions. I mean, it's really not difficult. May I ask what your pronouns are? Not. You also give the person an out to say, no, I'm not comfortable answering that question right now. Yes, I'd love to share with you. You know? So it's man, it's been such an interesting, painful experience, especially when you're constantly exploring. You have the audacity to constantly explore and knowing exactly who you are all the time. You know, there's that. It's been surprising, I would say, the pushback that I've gotten on my gender, not on my sexuality ever, but on my gender that I've gotten from the LGBTQ plus community. It's unfortunate. And I understand it. I completely get where they're coming from. You know, it's always assuming best intentions. You know, they come from good places. There is this desire for other humans. Well, there's this desire, I think, that most of us have to belong. I think like a common and much lived narrative of the queer community is that finding belonging is such a tedious process for so many of us. So there's this desire to belong. So in that desire to belong, maybe this is just my brain, okay? This is just how I'm thinking. Maybe there's also this insecurity with other people's exploration. Like if you've thought about it so much, should I? Or why are you thinking so much about it? Just come home. But where you define home, not necessarily where I define home. Huh? There's a lot of pushback around that. And I've noticed that I get that a lot from younger humans. Not high school humans. I'll be very clear. My high school humans, full on acceptance, always, right? Like 20s-ish, because I'm 36, yes, younger humans, but 20s-ish, like early 20s, you know, who have like explored their identity for maybe like the past few years, and you know, they're ready to know who they are, and who they are is somewhere on the spectrum, not on the binary. And I think somehow the fact that I identify being the way that I am and living the life that I live, the fact that I identify with one of the binary terms, it just really pisses people off. Or something like I'm a sellout. I think that's what it is. I think it makes them feel like I'm a sellout. After all this, you're going back to the binary. It's like that, you know. It's sweet. It's. I understand it.
It's interesting to think about binaries in the sense of also like kind of going back to even just gender based around expectations and restrictions and the process and the journey of, you know, performing gender and performing agency, right? Having agency within that exploration and that process. In a sense, that process is not binary because it is a process. Like there isn't like a here or here. And so in a sense, like it's interesting to think of like the gender binary as a way of helping me to understand other binaries in the way that I think, you know, like how do I think of things in terms of, okay, well, you know, even if it might not be a binary in the sense of literally a binary of two things, but there is still some sort of like, it's either this or this, like you're either in or you're out. And kind of, I know this is taking it into a more of a theoretical and like applying it to everything else, but like definitely I feel like my understanding of gender has grown over the years. And through learning more about gender, I feel like it's also helped me, and especially exploring binary, I feel like it's helped me to understand a lot of other things in my life as well, and a lot of other things in society, and the way that I think and the way that other people think as well.
Tell me a little bit more about, now that I've talked for an hour and 445 minutes, tell me a little bit more about your journey with gender, if you will.
Where should I, do you want me to just start with kind of like earliest memory? What was it?
How do you identify?
How do I identify? I identify as a man, cis, and I really resonate with what's interesting is for a really long time, and honestly, it was one of those things where I think because of my own understanding of gender and on the binary, right, especially, for the longest time, I was uncomfortable with being called a man. And I don't know how much of that was coming from a place of like, kind of like privileged guilt, right? Where it's like, oh, like, men are trash, and so like I'm like, I don't want to be trash. So I feel like that's a very real thing for sure. And at the same time, like Um, definitely, I think there's a certain amount of it that was literally like in my own head of like, what are the expectations that I am creating around manhood and manness, and like not necessarily feeling a sense of agency in my identity as a man. And I think that's something that has changed is I think especially through like any time and interacting um, with men. I think that was actually a thing. It's like I think I didn't have a lot of positive interactions with men. I feel like a lot of times.
Hold on. Let's go back to that. Expectations of manness, right? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And then you followed that up by saying not having agency as a man.
Okay.
Give me some explanation around that.
Yes. Okay. So no. Not having agency. Not having agency as a man. Thank you for the clarification because that is a weird statement. Yeah. No. That's a really weird statement.
You're a muscle. Sorry.
Yeah. No. I think more like in choosing the term. Like I think in the sense of so maybe I feel like that rewind that entire phrase because it's just like I feel like it's just it's just not.
But I want to know what you meant by that.
I think what I meant by that was more of like I am a man, and then at the same time, like I didn't really know what that meant, and I wasn't necessarily like. I think when it was only built around expectations, and in terms of like, I think from that place of like privileged guilt of like not necessarily thinking in an active sense like I am a man. Like I was like I think it was very much like during this kind of like transitionary period because like I was definitely identified as a boy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so like I was growing up like I'm a boy. And then like suddenly there was like a man and like there was like I was like I don't know what this means. Like I don't feel like I fit this. And there was but I also feel like that was kind of something where like and again like I'm trying to figure that out of like what is that how much of that is based around my own sort of expectations on like a man is this and that sense of like I don't want to be that, right? Like a man is like everything sort of negative, and more of like a selfish kind of desire to like not be those things. And so I was like perpetually like I'm like Peter Pan, like I just want to be a boy forever.
Question?
Yes.
If I may?
Yes, absolutely. This is hard conversations. Let's go.
Didn't want to be those things or didn't feel like you had the capacity to meet those expectations? Didn't want to meet those expectations or didn't feel like you could and therefore rejected them?
I think it depended on the expectations, but I think a little bit of both.
It's a lot of privilege and a lot of guilt. You know that, right?
Yeah.
You know?
And I think because I've had this conversation with men who also have that sort of similar kind of experience of like that male guilt piece of like which is the reason why I feel like I identify as a cis man now, is I think because of the fact that that period of like being like, I don't want to be in this identity, was coming from that place of privilege and guilt. And also, you know, and that privilege and guilt mix, right, of like, I can't meet these expectations and I don't want to meet these expectations at the same time. And nonetheless, I'm receiving the privileges, and, you know, so like all of that at the same time is like happening there. And again, not to tell anybody how to identify, but like when cis men identify as like, well, like I'm, you know, like gender fluid and, you know, I'm not cis and like all this, and I'm kind of like, well, and how do, like, this kind of gets into the sort of thing of like, how do we recognize privilege in the context of these identities, and like not in the same way that like I feel like I was saying like I don't want to be this, how much of that is coming from a place of privilege. So that is something that I struggle with.
Heard. Someone just tried to join our conversation.
I mean,
hopefully it's not anything we have to be worried about. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's multiple ways to how to say this. Simply because we identify a certain way doesn't mean our privilege is removed from us. What do we always say at CTV? Not identity, something else we say, right? Why am I blanking? How we present ourselves, I'm asking, how we present ourselves and how the world sees us. 50%, yes. What?
Yeah, 50% how we see ourselves, 50% how others see us.
Others see us, whatever that is.
Whatever, and then again, the percentages don't matter. It's just a matter of
the word, whatever, some concept.
Yeah.
But I think like, I think it is, it's reductive to other humans who have a certain visibility about their identities, right? To say that simply because we identify a certain way that you no longer have those privileges. You know what I mean? I'm not a man, right? But I perform my masculinity very intentionally and very strongly. I have oodles of masculine privilege, right? I'm also a brown woman with a certain type of accent, right? I have tons of racial privilege because of it. I certainly don't have white privilege, but I have tons of racial privilege because of it too. But I think simply because, again, simply because we identify a certain way, it doesn't mean our privileges go away with it.
I think that's
we should be telling people how to identify either. If somebody identifies as gender fluid, then they're not a cis man. So we're not going to call them that, right? And at the same time, if they identify as gender fluid and the world sees them as cis, they are going to receive certain privileges.
And I think that's the thing that like, is the area of navigation, is like of how, again, how to navigate that privilege, and the fact that it, again, like these, and again, this comes back to like binary thinking. Like even right now, even in my thinking, right, it's like, because you receive this privilege, it's like no, like you can identify, you can have this identity, and you can be on this, in this process and exploration, and at the same time still have this and this and this privilege. And like, what is the fact that even just, you know, in my own kind of processing, I'm just like, oh, I'm still going to this binary of like, privilege means this and this and this, or if you have this privilege, then it must be this, you know, you must have this identity kind of a thing, you know?
Yeah, we're also going to permission, right? You know, we can't tell people how to function within their identities. You know what I'm saying? We have to be cautious of that because we don't know what their lived experience looks like outside of the lived experience that they're having with us in this moment. You know, that's why gender is so complicated and yet so simple.
Yeah, because I'm bringing my own complicated structures.
Right.
Or it's making it complicated because I'm bringing my own structures into the conversation that don't fit and don't align with every person's personal experience and journey.
And it might just, I mean, I'm just saying, like, as a cisgender man, as a self-identified cisgender man, this might not be your place.
And that too.
You know? Maybe it's not a conversation. Maybe it's a conversation you should be having with other cisgender men like yourself who are also processing. Are you still there with guilt? Or has that changed over your journey?
I feel like it's changed. I think guilt is always a thing. Shame is always a thing. I mean, I feel like that's more of a general thing in my life. So like the whole, you know, my shame spiraling. It's like, don't shame spiral. Do that, you know. So that's I think just across the board. But no, I think from an identity standpoint, I feel like it has changed. Yeah. The fact that I'm able to have this conversation and I'm not, you know, like the fact that like you can check me and, you know, like,
yeah.
Because this is something where like, this is an area of growth for me, right? This is an area where I don't know as much because of my own experiences that are part of the majority.
Right. So you said previously that you didn't like being identified as a man, but now you identify as a cis man. Yeah. May I ask what that process has looked like for you?
Honestly, I honestly think that a lot of it was because of continued involvement with Anytown and Community Tampa Bay. Mm-hmm. Continued involvement with, I think, interacting with men-identified humans in a way where I was like, oh, like this is, I don't know. I think it was like also seeing different examples of masculinity and different kinds of, you know, different performances of gender that, again, that started to, even before thinking in terms of like putting the word, you know, binary to it, starting to chip away at kind of like the concept of this extreme binary, you know? And I think like starting to see spectrum even before we started incorporating that into the gender workshop.
Right.
Just because of interactions with folks and being able to and again, I think like honestly it is, yeah, it's through a lot of those interactions. So it's different folks.
Right. Yeah, I think there's something to be said about also, you know, recognizing toxic masculinity within, you know, all spaces, but particularly cis spaces, and how that seeps into queer spaces too. Because again, so much of how we see the world is defined by heteronormativity. There's so much undoing that has to happen before any doing happens. I think that's why this journey is always so long. Because first you have to like undo everything, and then you're just left there exposed, like, dang, where do I go from here? You know, and it feels like there's no direction, feels like there's no camaraderie, feels like there's no solidarity. A good percentage of the time you feel isolated, even though you might not be, because queer spaces aren't as normative as they should be, as they could be normative. Sorry, my bad, wrong language. Queer spaces aren't as normalized, right? As available and visible, you know, as we need. Even now, like there's so much more visible than when I came out and started performing gender, you know, gender conscious gender and stuff like that. But even now, it's still not as visible as we want it to be, right? As we are trying to build, we're building toward that visibility of we're here, we're queer, you know, like, but we're here, right? Of everybody being able to find it just as easily as they can find anything else. And so I think when you don't know what you're looking for, it's hard to find it. It's hard to search for it, right? So I think like that space of isolation and then that whole rebuild back up. God, just talking about it makes me realize like how exhausting that process is. You know, and I think that's where the complicated piece comes up. Is because of all of that undoing that we have to do, and then the rebuilding that we have to do. We're not just building, we're rebuilding from scratch. All of that makes it complicated. And then once you get to that space of realizing that I can do whatever the hell I want, how I want to do it, you know, according to like what feels right to me intuitively, where I am in this current space that I'm occupying, where my mindset is at, where my heart is, where my body is, and how, where my soul is, and how all of these function together. And you are able to recognize that you can, in fact, make an actual choice, which happens over years, right? You recognize again, you recognize, and then you recognize, and then you recognize again, right? That's also a process. It's not one single space. I think that's where, like, it's in that process, that sphere of process, that it starts to feel simple. Because now it's up to you. You can rely on, because you've been doing this forever. You know? So, yeah. Want to leave it at that?
Yeah, we can get into we can do a part 2.
So you know what? If we are gonna do a part 2, then it has to come because of demand. So for everyone who's watching out there, post your questions, ask us, post it on our comments. I know I have a lot of humans from the community who probably want to see what this conversation has to say, you know, and so just simply because of our identities, right? And I'm excited to hear from all of y'all. So ask all the questions. Come at me if you want to. It's all good. I'm not making that invitation for you. I'm making that invitation for me. Okay.
Y'all can come at me too. I mean, clearly, and check me, because this is literally the whole point of this is to grow. So. Okay,
so let's say it like this. Come at me if you want to hold Masa accountable. I will defend my identity to my last breath. Nobody knows me better than I do. I will defend that to the last breath. So, what was it? Yeah, so ask all your questions. Let's have a solid conversation. If we feel we need to have more, if we need to know more about each other's journey, so on and so forth. I know like what I've shared is a snippet of my journey, right? So if there's other questions that y'all want to ask, if you want to take this conversation offline, wherever you want this to go, let's do it. Let's make it happen. Gender and sexuality are two of my favorite conversations to have. I'm so sorry. Two of my favorite conversations, but thank you. So yeah, let's do this. This is so much fun. I love this. This could go on for like 3 hours. If we want to make this, if we want a gender webinar.
Just our conversation about gender the whole time.
Yeah, if we want to do like a gender Zoom call for like 3 hours and like share our experiences around gender, I'm so happy to do that too. I'd love to talk about it from a colonial perspective as well. There's just so much.
Yes, no, that was actually one of the questions that I was gonna, but again, for another time, potentially, but yeah.
I don't know how to do that in 45 minutes. You know what I'm saying?
No,
Like
exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk, fam. Let's do this. These are conversations that we need to have. Let's have these conversations. All right. Okay. So good, Masa. Yeah, we'll sign off. We're about an hour, 15-minute mark met. So we are solid. We said we'd go over. We kept our promise.
Okay.
So all right. Thank you, fam. Appreciate y'all for listening. Hopefully, y'all will ask us some questions, and we'll see how we can move this in a direction that hasn't been moved in before. Right. So, all right. Ending this.